She woke up every day for 42 years believing she knew who she was. Your name, its origin, your family. Everything felt solid like the asphalt of the Texan roads she knew by heart. But on an ordinary afternoon in 1988, a letter arrived in the mail, and with it, a truth that would crumble every brick of life she built. The name on the paper was not hers. The date of birth was wrong, and the attached photograph showed a woman she had never seen, but whose face was exactly the same as his. How would you live knowing that you spent entire decades being someone who never existed? Margaret grew up under the relentless sun of Amarillo, Texas. The only child of a conservative farming couple, she always knew her place. Helping on the farm, going to church on Sundays, obeying without question. His parents, Harold and Doris, were tough people. They had been working since dawn. They spoke little. They showed affection through hearty meals and long silences at the dinner table. Margaret never felt completely at home there. There was something shifted. She didn't like horses like her father. He didn't have the same resigned look as his mother. His skin burned too fast in the Texas sun. Her blonde hair looked different from her parents' heavy brown. But these were just details, right? Small differences that every child notices and then forgets. At school, Margaret was quiet, observer. She always felt like she was a step away from the other children's games, as if she spoke an invisible language that no one else understood. At the age of 10, she found an old box in the attic. Inside, baby clothes that didn't match the stories her parents told. A blue jumpsuit when she always heard that she wore pink. A birth certificate with a date she didn't recognize. When she asked her mother, Doris looked away. These old things don't matter, Margaret. The past is the past. And the girl believed it, because children believe. Margaret grew up trying to fit into a life that was never meant for her. At 18, she fell in love with a young man named Samuel, a mechanic from Oklahoma City, who came through Amarillo repairing tractors. He had grease-stained hands and a smile that lit up any room. They married in 1964 in a small ceremony at the Baptist church. Margaret put on her mother's wedding dress, which was too loose, as if it had been made for someone else. She and Samuel moved to Dallas. He opened a mechanical workshop. She worked as a secretary in a law firm. They had 2 children, Daniel in 1966 and Rebecca in 1969. Margaret loved her children with an intensity that hurt, as if by loving them, she could finally find a place where she belonged. But there was a shadow, always. In the family photos, Margaret smiled, but her gaze seemed distant, as if she was always looking for something she couldn't name. Samuel noticed. "Sometimes you seem to be somewhere else," he would say gently, holding her hand. "I'm here," she replied. But it wasn't. Not completely. Margaret had recurring dreams. He dreamed of a different house, a garden with yellow flowers, a dark-haired woman singing in Spanish. When he woke up, the dream flowed like sand between his fingers. She tried to ignore him. After all, she had a real life. A husband, children, bills to pay, dinners to prepare. But the discomfort grew. At the age of 30, she stopped going to family gatherings. She said she was busy. But the truth was different. She couldn't bear to look at Harold and Doris and feel that deep strangeness, that emptiness that had no explanation. "Why don't I look like you?" she once asked as an adult. "Genetics is just like that," Doris replied dryly, and Margaret swallowed the question along with the lump in her throat. The years passed. Daniel graduated in engineering. Rebecca started nursing school. Margaret turned 40, then 41. She looked in the mirror and saw a tired woman, wrinkles around the eyes, hair starting to turn white. Who was that person? The question echoed within her, but Margaret didn't have the courage to answer it. In January 1987, Doris passed away from a heart attack. Harold could not bear the loss. 2 months later, he also left. Margaret returned to Amarillo to take care of her parents' belongings. The house was exactly as she remembered it. Dusty, silent, full of unspoken secrets. It was in Harold's room that she found the box, a shoe box, hidden in the back of the closet under old blankets. Inside, there were documents. newspaper clippings, letters. Margaret sat down on the floor and began to read. One of the letters was from 1946. Handwritten, in formal English, addressed to Harold. We have confirmed the transfer as agreed. The child is healthy and will adapt well. All documents were provided. There will be no more contact. Margaret Luden Novo. And again, the child. What child? She kept looking. He found a birth certificate different from his own. The name was different. Sophia Maria Herrera. The date of birth was different. The location also Laredo, Texas. There was a photo, a small, dark-eyed girl smiling at the camera. Margaret knew that face. It was hers. Her hands trembled. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. She put away the documents and ran out of the house, her heart racing, her breath short. For weeks, Margaret tried to forget what she saw, but he couldn't. At night, she woke up in a cold sweat. The images of that box, that letter, that name, Sophia Maria Herrera, did not leave her head. Samuel noticed the change. "Are you okay?" he would ask. "I am," she lied. But it wasn't. Margaret began to investigate quietly. He went to the public library. He looked for birth records in Laredo. He tried to find the name Sophia Maria Herrera in old archives. Nothing. It was as if Sophia had never existed, or as if it had been erased. It was in March 1988 that the letter arrived. Margaret was alone in the house when the postman rang the doorbell. She signed for a registered mail, not knowing that that envelope would change everything. The sender was a San Antonio law firm. Inside, a formal letter. "Dear Margaret, we are reaching out on behalf of our client, Ms. Elena Herrera, who believes she has relevant information about her origin. We ask you to contact us for a face-to-face meeting as soon as possible." Margaret read it 3 times before she was able to sue. Elena Herrera. Herrera, the same last name as the certificate she found. She called the office the same day. The lawyer's voice was kind but professional. "Ms. Margaret, Ms. Elena Herrera claims to be your biological mother. She searched for her for decades. Recently, with the help of private investigators, we were able to locate her." Margaret felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "My mother was Doris," she whispered. "We understand that this is a shock, but Ms. Herrera has proof. Documents. Pictures. She would love to meet her." Margaret hung up the phone and collapsed on the couch. She cried. He cried for hours. When Samuel got home, she told him everything. He hugged her in silence. There were no words for that. 2 weeks later, Margaret was sitting in a meeting room in San Antonio, facing a gray-haired, dark-eyed woman. Elena Herrera. The woman looked at her as if she were seeing a ghost. "Sophia?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Margaret did not answer. Elena began to speak. Her voice trembled, but she kept going. "You were born in Laredo in 1946. I was very young, 17. Your father, he has forsaken us. I had no money. I had no family. I was desperate." Elena paused, wiping away her tears. "A couple offered to help. They said they would take care of you temporarily, only until I recover. But they never gave you back. When I went back to pick her up, they were gone. They moved to another city. They changed his name. And I never saw you again." Margaret was frozen. "I've been looking for you for years," Elena continued. "I hired detectives. I gave interviews. Nothing. It was as if you had been erased from the world. And now you're here." Margaret looked at that woman. That face. Those eyes. She saw herself there. But he also saw a stranger. "I'm not Sophia," Margaret said at last. "My name is Margaret." Elena closed her eyes. A tear flowed. "I know," she whispered, "but you've always been Sophia to me." Margaret returned to Dallas in absolute silence. For days, she was unable to speak. He couldn't eat. He could barely sleep. Everything she thought she knew about herself had been destroyed. She was not Margaret and the daughter of Amarillo farmers. She was Sophia Maria Herrera, taken from her mother when she was a few months old. Every memory now seemed like a lie. Every family photo, a farce. She called Daniel and Rebecca and told them the truth. They were shocked, confused, lost. "So Grandma Doris was your real mother?" Rebecca asked incredulously. "No," Margaret replied. "What about Grandpa, Harold?" "No." Rebecca began to cry. Daniel was silent. Margaret's identity was not hers alone. It was also the children's, of the grandchildren who were yet to come, from the entire family history. And now everything was broken. Margaret stopped taking calls. He stopped leaving the house. I spent hours staring at nothing, trying to understand who she was. She was no longer the person she thought she was. But she couldn't be Sophia either. Sophia was a child who never grew up, a name on a piece of paper, a stolen life. Margaret was caught between two identities, and he did not belong to any of them. Samuel tried to help. He held her hand. He said that nothing changed between them, but it changed. Everything changed, because Margaret looked at him and thought, "You married a lie." Margaret needed to understand everything. She returned to San Antonio and met Elena again. This time, Elena brought photos. Photos of a smiling baby. Photos of a young mother holding her daughter. "That was you," Elena said, pointing to the child. Margaret touched the photo. That baby was her, but she was also a stranger. Why did they do that? Margaret asked. Elena sighs. Harold and Doris couldn't have children. They desperately wanted a child. Have you met someone who... That facilitated these things. It wasn't cool, but at the time, no one questioned it much. "And you left?" asked Margaret, her voice hard. Elena looked at her in pain. "I was a girl alone with no money, no support. They told me it was temporary. I believed it, and when I realized a mistake, it was too late." Margaret wanted to feel angry, but he only felt empty. She asked to see more documents. Elena brought everything: original certificates, letters, hospital records. Everything proved that Sophie Maria Herrera and Margaret were the same person. But Margaret didn't feel they were. She began to visit Laredo, the city where he was born. He walked the streets. He tried to feel some connection. Nothing. It was just another strange place. Margaret met distant cousins, aunts she never knew existed. They greeted her with tears and hugs, but she couldn't reciprocate. They were family on paper, but not in the heart. In June 1988, Margaret visited the grave of Harold and Doris. She stood there, staring at the tombstones. I should feel angry, betrayal, hate, but I didn't feel it. I only felt a deep sadness, because they were also victims of despair, of the time, of the circumstances. They created it. They fed her. They gave him a roof. But they hid the truth, and in that, they stole something from her that could never be returned: the right to know who she really was. Margaret knelt on the floor and let the tears fall. She cried for the child who was taken from Elena. He cried for the woman who lived a lifetime without knowing where she came from. She cried for her biological mother, who never stopped searching. And she cried for her parents who died carrying a secret that destroyed everything. When she got up, something had changed. She was no longer angry. There was only acceptance. The truth was painful, but it was real, and that, somehow, was better than living in a lie. Margaret was never the same again. She continued to be called Margaret. She continued to be Samuel's wife, mother of Daniel and Rebecca. But something inside her had changed. She visited Elena once a month. They talked for hours. Elena told stories of Laredo, the Herrera family, of traditions that Margaret never knew. Margaret listened, but he didn't recognize himself in those stories, because she wasn't Sophia. But it wasn't Margaret anymore either. She was something in between, a woman reconstructed from broken pieces. In 1990, Margaret began writing. A diary, not to publish, just a process. She wrote about identity, about what defines us, about how much of our life is choice and how much is just circumstance. Who are we? She wrote on a page. Are we the name they give us? The family that raises us? Or are we something deeper, something that exists independently of all of that? Margaret never found the answer, but he learned to live with the question. She looked at her children and knew they were real. The love he felt for them was real. She looked at Samuel and knew he loved her. It didn't matter the name. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had lived two lives, one that she believed in, and another one she never met, but both were hers. Margaret died in 2003 at the age of 57 of lung cancer. At the funeral, Elena was there, sitting next to Samuel, holding Rebecca's hand. Two families, a woman. On the tombstone was written, Margaret N., but below, in smaller letters, Sophia Maria Herrera, because in the end, she was both. And none of them. Sometimes, the life we live is not the one that was destined for us. Sometimes the truth comes too late. But when it arrives, we need to decide, are we going to let it destroy us, or are we going to use it to rebuild ourselves? Margaret chose reconstruction. What about you? What would you do if you found out that your whole life was built on a lie? Leave it in the comments. And sign up to follow other life stories that should never have been like this.